find places on Earth where humans can live almost anywhere. But then, there are places where survival is never guaranteed. That if land is there, humans will eventually find a way to live on it. We build cities in deserts. We create settlements in remote regions. We survive in places once thought impossible. So, when you look at a world map, you assume that every large landmass must be filled with people, movement, and life. But there is one place that challenges that idea: Greenland. At first glance, Greenland looks like it should matter more. It is one of the largest islands on Earth, larger than many countries with tens or even hundreds of millions of people, and yet only a very small number of people live here. There are no large cities in the way most people expect, no extensive road networks connecting the entire island. Instead, there are small communities, mostly located along the coastline. And that raises an important question. Why does such a large place have such a small population? The answer is not as simple as cold weather, because people do live in cold environments. It is not just isolation either. Humans have settled in remote regions across the world. What makes Greenland different is the combination of its geography, climate, and environment. When you look at Greenland on a map, it appears as a solid landmass, but in reality, most of it is covered by ice. Approximately 80% of Greenland is covered by a permanent ice sheet. This ice is not seasonal. It does not melt away each year. In some areas, the ice sheet is several kilometers thick, which means that much of Greenland is not accessible or usable as land. This has a direct impact on where people can live, because human settlements require stable ground, access to resources, and conditions that support daily life. In Greenland, those conditions exist only in limited areas. Most of the population lives along the coast, where there is exposed land, access to the sea, and relatively more stable conditions. Even in these areas, life is shaped by the environment. Temperatures can remain below freezing for long periods during the year. And while summers are milder, they are short. Large-scale farming is not practical in most parts of Greenland. Instead, people rely heavily on fishing and other natural resources. Another factor is infrastructure. Unlike many countries, Greenland does not have a connected road network linking its towns and settlements. Travel between communities is typically done by air or sea, and in some cases, by snowmobile or sled during winter. This makes transportation more complex and often more expensive. Weather conditions also play a major role. Flights and sea travel can be affected by strong winds, snow, and changing ice conditions. This can delay movement and limit access between regions. All of these factors combine to shape life in Greenland. It is not that people cannot live here. Clearly, they do. But the environment sets clear limits on how many people can live here and how communities can grow. So Greenland is not empty. It is simply a place where human settlement is naturally limited. And to truly understand why, we need to look deeper, beyond what we see on the surface, beyond the map. Because Greenland is not just a large island. It is a place shaped by forces that continue to define how people live and where they can survive. Now, let's look at the climate. Greenland has an Arctic climate. This means long, cold winters and short, cool summers. In many regions, temperatures remain below freezing for most of the year. Even in summer, temperatures are often low compared to other parts of the world. This has a direct impact on agriculture. Farming depends on stable soil, moderate temperatures, a sufficient growing season. In Greenland, these conditions are limited. The growing season is short. The soil, where it exists, is often thin or affected by permafrost. Permafrost is ground that remains frozen for long periods of time. When soil is frozen, it becomes difficult to grow crops or build stable infrastructure. This is why large-scale agriculture is not common in Greenland. Instead, people rely on other sources of food. Fishing is one of the most important. The surrounding waters are rich in marine life. Fish, shrimp, and other seafood play a major role in both diet and the economy. Hunting is also part of traditional life, especially in smaller communities. This includes hunting animals such as seals. These practices are not just cultural, they are practical responses to the environment. Now, let's consider daylight, because Greenland's location affects not only temperature, but also light. During winter, some parts of Greenland experience very little sunlight. In certain areas, the sun may not rise above the horizon for extended periods. This is often referred to as polar night. In summer, the opposite occurs. The sun remains visible for most or all of the day. This is known as the midnight sun. While these phenomena are natural, they can affect daily life. Sleep patterns, mental health, and routines can all be influenced by these cycles. Now, another important factor is terrain. Greenland is not flat. It includes mountains, valleys, fjords. Fjords are deep, narrow inlets formed by glaciers. They create dramatic landscapes, but they also act as natural barriers. Instead of connecting regions, the terrain often separates them. This further contributes to the isolation of communities. And finally, there is the question of scale. Greenland is very large, but its usable land area is relatively small. Most of the population is concentrated in a few coastal towns. This creates a situation where vast areas of the island have no permanent population. So, when people say Greenland is empty, what they really mean is most of its land cannot easily support large numbers of people. It is not impossible to live here. Clearly, people do. But the environment places limits on how many people can live here and how communities can grow. Greenland is not a place that can be developed in the same way as other regions. It requires adaptation, patience, and respect for natural conditions. And this is what makes Greenland unique. Its geography is not just a feature. It is the reason why life here looks the way it does, and why, even today, its population remains small. But geography alone does not tell the full story, because the way people live here today is also shaped by the past. To understand that, we have to look at history. To understand Greenland today, we have to look at its past, because the way people live here now is deeply connected to how people survived here before. Long before modern maps existed, Greenland was not fully understood. It was distant, remote, and largely unknown to the outside world. But it was not empty. Thousands of years ago, people began to move into Arctic regions from what is now North America. These movements happened gradually, over generations, not as large migrations, but as small groups adapting to new environments. These early inhabitants were the ancestors of the Inuit, and their approach to Greenland was very different from those who would come later. They did not try to change the land. They adapted to it. They learned how to live in extremely cold conditions. They developed tools suited for their environment, made from bone, stone, and wood. They created clothing designed to protect against freezing temperatures. They built shelters that could withstand wind and snow. And most importantly, they developed knowledge. Knowledge of the ice, knowledge of animal behavior, knowledge of seasonal patterns. This knowledge was not written down. It was passed through generations, and it allowed them to survive in a place where survival is never guaranteed. They relied on hunting and fishing. Animals such as seals and fish were essential sources of food. Every resource mattered. Nothing was wasted. Because in an environment like Greenland, efficiency is not optional. It is necessary. Over time, these communities settled along the coastline. They avoided the interior, because even early on, it was clear that most of Greenland was not suitable for human settlement. For many generations, this way of life continued, but Greenland's isolation did not last forever. Around the late 10th century, Norse explorers from Scandinavia began to reach Greenland. One of the most well-known among them was Eric the Red. After being exiled from Iceland, he traveled west and eventually arrived in Greenland. When he returned, he described the land in a way that would attract settlers. He called it Greenland. This name suggested a place that was more welcoming than it actually was. Historians believe this may have been intentional, because encouraging people to settle there required presenting the land in a positive way. And it worked. Groups of Norse settlers followed him to Greenland. They established communities along the southwestern coast. These settlements included farms, homes, and small social structures. For a time, they were successful. They raised livestock. They maintained contact with Europe. They adapted as best as they could. But Greenland remained a difficult place to live. Over time, conditions began to change. The climate became colder. This period is often associated with what is known as the Little Ice Age. Colder temperatures made farming more difficult. Growing food became harder. Sea conditions changed. Trade routes became less reliable, and isolation increased. At the same time, the Norse settlers faced another challenge. Their way of life was based on European farming practices. These practices worked well in milder climates, but in Greenland, they were less reliable. Unlike the Inuit, who had adapted to the Arctic environment, the Norse settlers depended more on systems that were not fully suited to local conditions. Over time, this created pressure on their communities. Resources became harder to maintain, and eventually, the settlements began to decline. By the 15th century, the Norse presence in Greenland had disappeared. The exact reasons are still debated, but most historians agree it was likely due to a combination of factors: climate change, isolation, economic challenges, and difficulty adapting fully to the environment. Meanwhile, the Inuit continued to live in Greenland. Their knowledge and adaptation allowed them to survive where others could not. For centuries after the Norse disappeared, Greenland remained largely outside of global attention, until European interest returned. This time, not primarily for settlement, but for trade, religion, and control. In the 18th century, Denmark established a more formal presence in Greenland. Missionaries arrived, trade networks were organized, and Greenland became part of the Danish kingdom. This introduced new systems of governance and economy. It also increased contact with the outside world. But even with this influence, Greenland did not change dramatically in terms of population size, because once again, geography set the limits. Large-scale settlement remained difficult, infrastructure remained limited, and communities stayed relatively small. In the 20th century, Greenland gained new importance, not only because of its resources, but because of its location. Situated in the Arctic, it became strategically significant. During global conflicts, including World War II and the Cold War, Greenland was used for military and monitoring purposes. This increased its global relevance, but it did not change the fundamental reality of life there. Greenland remained remote, its environment remained challenging, and its population remained small. Today, Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but it has its own government and a high level of self-rule. Over time, there has been a growing sense of national identity and ongoing discussions about greater independence. But regardless of political changes, one thing remains constant: the environment. The same factors that shaped Greenland's history continue to shape its present. Ice, climate, isolation. These are not just physical conditions. They are forces that have influenced who could live here and how. Greenland's history is not a story of expansion. It is a story of adaptation. A story that shows what happens when humans encounter an environment that cannot easily be changed. And once again, the pattern is clear. Those who adapted found a way to survive. Those who did not eventually left or disappeared. But history is only one part of the story, because life in Greenland today continues to reflect these same challenges. To understand that, we now turn to the present. To understand Greenland fully, you have to move beyond maps and history, because the real story of this place is found in the lives of the people who live here today. Along the narrow coastal edges of this island, small communities exist, not large cities, not densely populated regions, but towns and settlements, spread out and often separated by long distances. This is where life in Greenland happens. Most of these communities are located along the coastline, because this is where conditions allow people to live. There is access to the sea, there is exposed land, and the environment, while still harsh, is more manageable than the interior. The interior of Greenland, covered by the ice sheet, remains largely uninhabited, so life is concentrated along the edges. This creates a unique pattern of settlement. Instead of one connected population, Greenland consists of many small, relatively isolated communities. This means that movement between communities can be unpredictable. Sometimes, people must wait. This affects everything: supplies, communication, access to services. Life in Greenland requires patience. It requires planning, because not everything is immediately available. Food is one of the most important aspects of daily life. In many parts of the world, food is easily accessible. Supermarkets are stocked regularly. Supply chains are consistent. In Greenland, things are different. Many food items are imported. They arrive by ship or by air. Because of distance and transportation costs, imported food can be expensive, and availability can vary, so local sources of food remain very important. Fishing plays a central role. The waters around Greenland are rich in marine life. Fish and seafood are essential parts of the diet and the economy. Hunting is also practiced, particularly in smaller communities. Housing in Greenland is designed for the climate. Homes are built to retain heat. They are well insulated and constructed to withstand strong winds and low temperatures. Many houses are built on rock or stable ground along the coast. Bright colors are often used on the exterior: red, blue, yellow. These colors stand out against the snow and ice. They also help with visibility during darker months. Inside, life is generally simple and functional. Heating is essential. Space is used efficiently, and homes are designed for comfort in cold conditions. Community plays an important role in daily life. In smaller settlements, people often know each other well. Social connections are strong. Because in a place where conditions can be difficult, support systems matter. People rely on each other. This sense of community helps make life in Greenland possible. Education exists across Greenland, but access can vary. Larger towns have schools, but in smaller settlements, options may be limited. Students sometimes need to travel to continue their education. This can mean leaving their home community for periods of time. Healthcare is also available, but not always locally. There are hospitals and clinics in larger towns. But for more specialized treatment, patients may need to travel. Again, distance becomes a factor. Transportation limitations can affect how quickly care is accessed. Technology has improved life in Greenland. Internet and communication systems allow people to stay connected with the outside world. But technology does not remove the challenges of geography. The environment still defines daily life. Work in Greenland reflects this reality. When you first look at Greenland, it is easy to describe it as empty, a vast island covered in ice with very few people. But after understanding its geography, its history, and the realities of daily life, that description begins to change. Greenland is not truly empty. It is a place where human settlement is limited by natural conditions, a place where the environment sets clear boundaries. For centuries, people have arrived here with different expectations. Some came to explore, some came to settle, some came to build new lives, and each time they encountered the same reality. Greenland does not easily adapt to human needs. Instead, people must adapt to Greenland. Its climate, its geography, and its isolation all shape what is possible. This is why population growth has remained relatively small. It is not simply a matter of choice. It is a matter of conditions: limited land suitable for settlement, challenging weather, difficult transportation. All of these factors work together to define life here. At the same time, Greenland is not without importance. It plays a role in the global environment. Its ice sheet is closely studied by scientists because changes in Greenland's ice are connected to broader climate patterns. Melting ice contributes to rising sea levels, and this has implications far beyond the Arctic. Greenland is also important because of its location. Positioned between North America and Europe, it has strategic significance. This has influenced its role in global systems, particularly in areas such as monitoring and research. But even with this importance, the fundamental reality remains the same. Greenland is not a place where large populations can easily develop. And even if conditions change in the future, there are limits that will remain.